So when we start talking about sign up for the next next year, are there any things in particular? I know you addressed a couple of them, but any things in particular that farmers, dairy farmers specifically, need to be considering? Or, I'm not saying they need to do all their homework. They can start getting it from you, and we're putting together a very sophisticated tool on the website relatively soon. But what do they need to be doing and thinking about?
Yeah, so first of all, this is getting really critical for 2016. And I say that because sign up for 2015 stayed open until December 19th of 2014. So you could almost sign up and start getting coverage in just a few weeks later. This sign up for 2016 right now is currently slated to run July through September. Well, that's a lot further away from 2016. So producers need to get their arms around the fact they're going to have to sign up earlier for that 2016 coverage. We're going to know less about markets in 2016 than they do about markets in 2015 when they signed up.
Right.
That shouldn't discourage them from signing up. That should make them do more homework in terms of using this as a risk management tool for 2016. And I hope many of them will look at how can I lay off risk in either futures markets with my local co-op, other ways to lay that risk off, and then compare the cost of using those other options to things like MPP and make the decision about how much risk do I need to lay off in 2016 and where do I lay it off.
Sure, that's very important. With regard to resources there at your center in Columbia, obviously you've probably what resources do you have available for this so far?
Yeah, so a spreadsheet-based tool has been available that helps with the decision regarding MPP. We'll work on that again for 2016, also working with you guys here at the Ag and Food Policy Center on a web-based tool. I see a lot more additions coming for us because, again, I think too many of the tools have been focused on trying to maximize the dollars from the program. And it's the one thing I've learned by doing the education last year. We need to do more than what we've done thus far, and that is helping producers see the difference in the different ways I can lay that risk off.
Yeah, I work a lot on the crop side, and obviously there's a lot of people chasing dollars there, and those are the worst to work with, actually. The ones that I like working with are the ones that understand that these are all tools that are going to try to help them mitigate some of these problems. And yeah, you want the thing to pay quite a bit when things go to pieces, but at the same time, don't expect something all the time. And the dairy program is like that. This is not a free money program. This is people are going to have to spend their hard-earned dollars to try to mitigate some of the risk, and it's an important concept. One of the difficult things about this program is that hindsight is going to be really good.
Yes.
And when we start going through this, we're going to have people beating themselves up over, well, Scott Brown told me that the tool tells me that the best thing to mitigate my risk is $7 coverage, whatever. And now it didn't work out that way. What are you going to tell people about this?
Yeah, so I always, number one, find it amazing that hindsight is 20/20, Joe.
Right.
We know, and many times I think we've found, looking over the last 4 or 5 years, it would have been to participate or not participate. And I think about that as taking $8 coverage or no coverage. And I go, well, so if I was chasing program dollars, maybe that's the strategy I want to take, all in or not in at all.
Right.
But I go, we don't know that forward risk. And many of us have really struggled, I think, with the volatility in milk prices and feed costs. I mean, we haven't even talked about a drought in 2015 and what that does to feed costs. But I think producers need to look hard about what's their long run. Where do you really fit? Do I need $5 coverage? Do I need $7 coverage? It isn't one size fits all. It's what kind of risk do I need to lay off as an individual operation. If you can evaluate that, then I think it helps you know, how do I want to move from year to year? Because if it looks like a good year, maybe you're going to buy less coverage. If it looks like a bad year, I may buy more. But don't get to the ends of the spectrum in that coverage.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, one of the problems is you're going to be buying it so far out in advance. And I know there was a reason for them doing that they didn't want a lot of this, what they call in the crop insurance world, moral hazard of people basically trying to take advantage of seeing something coming. But this is a pretty far advance to be buying this type of insurance for the next year. It's basically going to work out to be 3 months, I guess, by the time the sign-up is over with. That's quite a bit of time, and in the dairy industry, we've seen prices go from the highest of highs to the lowest of lows in about that period of time, or maybe a little longer. With regard to trying to help producers, push them to a one level or another, one of the things we haven't talked about is it's important to do this. Me as a dairy producer, my feed costs have been this, and my milk price is this, and I can get my margin, and everything's paid on a national margin. And we have said, and I've heard you in many, many meetings talking about the correlation of your margin to the national. But I know in personal conversations, we've already talked about this, and you don't get the feeling that very many people looked at their margin relative to the national. Well, why is that? And I think that's probably pretty obvious, but why is that?
I view that as a problem of it's just hard to get people to think carefully about correlation matters, because this is really easy. If your margin is perfectly correlated with the national margin, then it means you're going to get payments when you need payments the most. Your margin is at the lowest level when the national margin's at the lowest level. And the more I anecdotally talk to producers, I found very, very few cases where their margin wasn't very highly correlated with the national margin. But I think many folks have not taken the time to do that, and I think in large part it's complicated.
Right.
Trying to put that history together, it isn't easy, but I think that is a critical piece of education we need to work on.
Well, this is just off the top of my head, but I guess one of the things I found was that it's one thing to ask them what was your annual feed costs and your annual milk price, but when we really needed to have this bi-monthly stuff, that gets a little bit more involved, and people have to do a lot more thinking, especially since to do a correlation we need more than just a year or two.
Yeah.
We need a couple of years, and pretty soon we're asking them to go back and pull out quite a few numbers.
Yeah, so again, inputs aren't purchased continually. We want them bi-monthly, but you might have made a feed purchase for the next 6 months. And so you get the question of how do I allocate that? So it does add a lot of complication relative to the way producers probably think about their books. But I so strongly encourage, before you walk away from MPP because you don't think it's a good tool for you, that you take the time to look at the correlation. Even if your margin is different in terms of level, that doesn't matter as much as the correlation. So how does it move? How does your margin move relative to the national margin? And that's the most important piece of that puzzle.
I do. There's one more question, I guess, that's popped into my mind. Do you have much experience with producers talking about buying less than 90% coverage? And what would be this kind of a situation where you might want to look at that real strongly?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and I don't have the perfect answer for you, but as I looked at producers making their 2015 choice, in some cases I did hear folks who would say, you know what, Scott, I don't have enough money to take 90% coverage on, let's say, a $7 margin, but I can take 30% coverage on a $7 margin. Right. Now, you could know the question came right away, Scott, is that a good idea to take 30% coverage at $7? And I quickly go, I don't know. Right. I'll tell you after the fact, but I think that comes down to how much risk can your operation withstand. And if you can withstand some risk, maybe buying up at a lower coverage quantity is an option that might be workable in your situation. There's not a one size fits all in this decision process. So understanding risk and then your expectation of where you think margins are going to be in front are the two pieces that you have to really discuss.
In the development of the bill, what was the logic behind giving that? I mean, sometimes, and I think it's a good thing to have the ability to buy at varying levels, But some people will say, just like in crop models that I work on very closely, all these decisions, I don't have to just pick my margin. I got to figure out what level of protection, and if I only do half my production, which a lot of people, marketing, a lot of people are saying, I'm just going to do half at a pretty reasonable level, and that's the kind of, I got that kind of money. I would have used that for either doing stuff in the futures or not, and that's what I'm going to do just to test it out. To me, and I want to get your input on this. Anytime a producer does something in advance, making a decision to try to mitigate their risk, they're doing a great decision. Now, sometimes the results could be less than great, or whatever word we want to use. But the fact that they're actually being proactive and trying to take control a little bit of the risk and manage it. You're not going to eliminate it. We can't eliminate it, but we can manage it. And so I guess, what's your feelings on that?
Yeah, so I often say, you look back at 2009, the worst year probably ever for the dairy industry, and you frankly had folks in 2008 making what they thought were the best decisions possible, and no one knew how low milk prices were going to go. Having a tool now to help you with that low side and actually taking advantage and using it to manage risk, I think is a big win relative to what we've had in the past. And so I don't, I hope we have a tool that producers can use that helps mitigate that risk when they make decisions. If I want to expand, I've probably got more risk in my operation being financially viable, and how can I use these programs to reduce that risk? Ultimately, I probably used risk a dozen times in this last sentence, but these programs being risk reduction, not program maximization, cannot be said often enough as people think about MPP.
Well, I would be really a poor interviewer if I didn't ask you these questions. For the market next year, you already mentioned China and you mentioned a few other things, but if you were going to be looking at the feed side, which obviously we're building stocks on corn and soybeans, not terribly big, but we're building stocks, so that's a negative on the price side. Mm-hmm. Alfalfa hay, there's not a futures market. There's national. It's a national market, and frankly, if I'm an individual producer, I don't worry about the national market for alfalfa hay. I worry about what's the market where I'm going to buy it from. So, when people start thinking about this, do you have any cues that, this is probably a short run, this is probably going to be good this week and it'll be changed next week, but is there any cues that producers need to be looking at to see if things may change drastically for next year?
Yeah, so I always go weather, exchange rates, international demand generally related to exchange rates, and then domestic demand matters as well. What happens to fluid demand? It's been headed south for a period of time. If we were to have a drought and the rest of the world stayed out of dairy markets, 2016 could look very tough. Projecting either one of those things to happen is pretty tough at this point in time, but those are the kind of factors I like to look at in looking ahead into 2016.
If you take those aside and you go, okay, I understand those. Where the markets are right now on dairy products, that would be for next year would be a negative or a plus on price. Taking those weather out, just say it's a normal weather year, demand is demand. What I'm basically saying is where's supply moving?
Yeah, so I think when you look at milk supplies, we haven't done really anything to terribly make us adjust downward. So I think milk supplies are going to continue to come on board. You could even look globally and go, with the EU quota elimination, we're likely going to see a net more milk supplies, maybe not that much, but more from the EU generally. So I think we have more supplies ahead, and I think we know which way that affects prices. And it's only just how strong demand becomes relative to more supplies of milk in 2016.
Well, on the feed side, anybody's guess. Obviously, weather drives a lot, but frankly, if I was sitting here today worrying about feed for next year, that would probably be one of the lesser problems that I have. because of where we are with supplies on hand.
Yeah, so repeating 2012 is probably not in the cards because of stocks we're holding. But a drought similar to 2012 certainly gets us corn prices that move from the mid threes to $4 level to maybe 5 to 6, somewhere in there.
Right.
So higher feed costs. So for me, alfalfa is always the interesting one. So alfalfa prices, I think, have been generally coming down. Better weather has helped there, but frankly, we've lost some international demand for alfalfa as well.
Right.
So although we've lost maybe a little bit of international demand for milk, we've also lost it in alfalfa because the dollar has gotten stronger against a lot of currencies.
Last question, unless we can come up with something else. If a producer spends, let's just say $50,000 in buying a certain level of margin protection, and this is the tough one. They spend it, and they don't get anything from the government. And I hear this a lot. It was money wasted. What do you think about that statement?
Yeah, so I don't agree that it was money wasted. Number one, you sure wish that you didn't have to have that expenditure. I get that, but I sure think it makes your operation more viable long term because it provides that safety net when you most need it. And so producers, because you can see this potentially happening in 2015 already. We'll have signed up for 2015. We'll have stayed above and not make any payments. And producers will go, what? Dang it, I shouldn't have purchased that, and for 2016 I'm not getting in. And then we have a really bad 2016, and they should have gotten in.
Right.
And then they go, oh, I should have gotten in, and they'll buy it for 2017, and it won't pay.
What is the term, chasing markets or something like that?
So I think exactly that could be at play here if we aren't careful in getting producers to think, again, beyond program maximization into where does this fit in your risk management scheme. And I'm not saying you have to do it, but if you don't do MPP, what other things are you doing to reduce risk?
Right. I guess keep saying final question, but it's my deal. I can keep asking you questions. Really, I guess one other thing is dairying in particular is a very, I tell my friends in the dairy business a lot, you people have more money than anybody I know, and you have more feed costs. The next statement is this thing is a very cash flow intensive deal. A lot of cash flow, but you have a lot of expenses. I think that this program will allow producers to begin starting to think more carefully. Some have already been doing this for many years. More carefully about risk management tools, whether it's MPP or the futures market, that is going to make it easier to get loans in the future. And, most people say, the lenders are not, the lenders are going to have to be educated about this program as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to have to understand what they are and are not getting from this. But to me, I just cannot see a situation where if I'm lending to a dairyman that I don't want to see something happening in this regard because there's just been too much volatility in the markets, however you want to call it, too much risk, too much exposure. And we all know of many dairies who might be highly leveraged that this is going to be particularly a big issue for.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I, again, often say you had a lot of lenders who ran away from the dairy industry after going through 2009 and 2012, who now you hope with these kinds of programs may actually come back and be interested in lending to the dairy industry again. I think we're seeing some signs of that already just with some of the market returns. But again, I think these programs offer them potentially a more satisfying loan portfolio, if you will.
Well, it's a very, from their perspective, dairying is lucrative, but at the same time, there can be the losses go when they build very fast, and you've got to have some equity there and a lot of equity for them to hang with you. And we found out that we thought for many years we had some dairies that were too big to fail that actually did.
Yes.
And so hopefully we get out of that situation and get into a situation where people can manage. It's always going to be risks. There's always going to be things we can't, the unexpected. But at the same time, with this new tool, it is so much better than a dairy price support program that had really no effect at all, other than it counted against our international trade obligations, and an MILC program, which a lot of people say was great, but one of the reasons why they thought it was so great is because it was free.
Yes. Yep. And again, MILC, it protected 34 to 45% of the price decline. Under a program like this, you could potentially get up to 90%, depending on what you want to cover.
Right. So there's two different things, but at the same time, as we start educating producers more and more on these programs, I think there's some really big potential to save, not just save money. I'm talking about save businesses, and this is a big deal. So anything else we need to add?
I think we've covered the road front.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.